Friends, welcome to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It's not difficult for you, but it's nice for me, and we're starting. I, Connor Dixon, was planning to move to a new city, the one where my beloved cousin Jeremy lived, and to sort things out, I made a long weekend trip there. The original plan was to stay with Jeremy, but his wife's entire family decided they wanted to visit me at the same time. So I was transferred to the Hilton Hotel. It wasn't difficult. One of the few problems I didn't have in my life was money. My main problem was the lack of decent female company. It seemed that I was attracted to all the unsuitable types of women, which usually led to either anger, disappointment, misunderstanding, or a broken heart on my part. Since Jeremy didn't like spending too much time with his wife's family, he and I hung around while I looked for places to live and set up my law practice. My practice is such that I rarely have to meet clients in person, so I can live and work anywhere where I am a member of the State Bar Association. On Saturday evening, Jeremy and I went to a party organized by one of his business partners, Tom Baring. The party was typical for people under 30, except that he had a large dance floor in his equipped basement, which was often used. There were a few unmarried ladies there, and I'm a decent dancer and I like dancing, so I was very busy. However, there was one incomprehensible thing. Tom's wife, Susan, seemed to be a cross between a maid and a quiet one. She didn't seem to have much to talk to, and mostly she worked making sure all the drinks were available. Besides, she seemed to put up with a lot of shit from Tom, whom I immediately disliked. I noticed Susan in the first place because she was wearing a beautiful dress, not fashionable, just cute, while most of the other women were wearing jeans or shorts. Susan's face wouldn't have launched 1,000 ships, and her clothed body wouldn't have inspired Michelangelo or Da Vinci to create a sculpture, but she was more than a decent-looking woman. The old phrase, "I wouldn't kick her out of bed," came to my mind for some reason, confusing me because I didn't like to think about women in that way, especially married ones. Eventually, when there was a short break in my dance card, I noticed that Susan had gone to the kitchen for extra snacks. I was introduced to her when we got to the venue, and she said the only word I really heard her say all evening: hello. I followed her into the kitchen and told her without scaring her, "Susan, it looks like you're working too hard and not having fun. Can I help you with something?" In case you don't remember from our brief acquaintance, my name is Connor. She wasn't just looking into my eyes. She seemed to be looking into my soul. Her eyes were so dark that they seemed almost black before she replied, "Thank you." Then she started washing glasses in the sink and asked, "Can you wipe it off?" I took a kitchen towel and started to wipe it off. I tried to engage her in conversation, and although she answered questions, the answers were brief, not unfriendly, just very brief. And her responses to statements were usually just nods of the head or a smile, rarely words. After we washed all the glasses, I helped her put some more snacks on the plates, and then took half of the plates and glasses to the dance floor and to the bar. After a while, I asked her to dance. She refused. "Tom doesn't like it when I dance," was probably the longest sentence she had uttered that evening. "Too bad." I giggled and led her to the dance floor. She was a sports dancer, and she seemed to like it, but at the beginning of our second dance, Tom came up to her and ordered her to bring him something. She shrugged her shoulders and left. I was angry, and if he hadn't been the host and one of Jeremy's colleagues, I would have intervened. Sometime later, I found Susan alone in the kitchen again. I turned her towards me and asked, "Why do you let Tom treat you like that? You seem like a wonderful woman. You shouldn't let him treat you rudely." She smiled and simply replied, "It's difficult. Could you help me again?" I willingly completed another task for her, and after that she really came up to me. "Where are you staying?" "What is it?" she asked, starting a conversation for the first time, not only with me, but with everyone I was watching. "At the Hilton on Grand Street." "How did you know I was just visiting?" "Jeremy introduced you," she smiled, then shocked me with another question. "Does your room have a view of the lake?" "Yes, it's a beautiful view." "So the number is even." "On which floor?" "This is number 810. "You must be familiar with the Hilton Hotel," I replied with a smile. She smiled back and then left to do some other things. When Jeremy and I were leaving, I said goodbye to Susan. Tom was drunk at the time and would hardly have remembered what I said to him, so instead of thanking him, I just mumbled, "You're an asshole?" I think Susan heard me. At least, I think that's what made her smile. Jeremy and I went to a local hangout, played a little pool, and then I went to my hotel. I took a shower and was only in my underwear, about to go to bed, when there was a knock on my door. I looked through the peephole, but all I could see was something that looked like a woman's hair. I opened the door a crack and was shocked to see Susan. She was wearing a raincoat. Susan didn't say anything when I asked, "Hi, Susan, why are you here?" Instead, she opened her cloak to reveal a very beautiful body, and when it took on its intended shocking significance, she took the opportunity to just walk past me. By the time I closed the door and my mouth was wide open, although my eyes remained wide open, she was wearing nothing but high heels. She grabbed me by the neck, kissed me hot enough to set off the fire alarm, although, fortunately, this did not happen, and put one hand in my boxers. What happened was the strangest experience of my life. As far as I remember, not a word was spoken. There were a lot of groans, squeals, and excited exclamations, but no real words. The more I touched and kissed Susan, the more I liked it. Susan was the most relaxed and energetic partner I've ever had in my life or even dreamed of. Eventually, we stopped moving, both completely exhausted. We somehow disconnected our connecting parts and, given the hour and intensity of our copulation, either fell asleep or lost consciousness. Some indefinite time later, I felt activity in my crotch. Soon, I dropped the second biggest load of my life, and we both collapsed onto the mattress. I was in the twilight zone and didn't realize it when Susan apparently got up, put on her raincoat again, and left. I felt cold lying on the bed. Finally, I crawled under the covers and fell into a deep sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I was sure it was just a dream. I struggled to remember if Susan had even spoken at all the previous evening during our rampage. I couldn't remember her saying even one word, but if her actions were words, they could fill a book the size of Tolstoy's War and Peace. The next day, I was practically in a trance. Jeremy and I looked at several houses and offices together, but I was actually far from it. He must have asked me half a dozen times, "What the hell is wrong with you, Connor?" I came up with some lame excuse about a hangover, despite the fact that I probably drank 2 beers in total the night before. However, I actually had a hangover. When I returned home on Monday morning, all I could think about was my loving encounter with the silent Susan. Although I've dated at least a dozen women who looked better than Susan, loving her was a whole light year better than any other love I've ever had. I should be upset and feel guilty for making love to a married woman, which I had never done before and intellectually and morally despised. Instead, I felt only excitement. For the next month, preparing for the move, I was emotionally exhausted. Except when I was working or training intensely, I was thinking about Susan. It was a month after my move, before I pulled my head out of my ass and started looking for sorority in my new city. I made it a rule never to pass by Susan's house or try to contact her. I really liked my new city. After about 3 months of being there, I was making even more money than before. The surroundings were invigorating, and I made several friends, both male and female. I've had a few dates, but nothing that really turned my boat around. It was almost the 3-month date of my new home when I went to a party without a couple at Jeremy's house. I was having a pretty good time when Tom and Susan walked in the door. When I saw Susan, my thoughts immediately returned to my heavenly experience in room 810 of the local Hilton Hotel. She looked exactly the same as she had at her party, although the dress was a different color and the hairstyle was more refined. I waited for Tom to take a couple of sips of strong liquor, and when Susan was standing alone on the side of Jeremy's little dance floor, I went up to her. "Hi, Susan," I smiled. "Hi, Connor," she replied with a smile as well. "Do you want to dance?" I asked, holding out my hand. She just nodded her head, yes, smiled, and took my hand. We actually danced until we dropped. Susan was less stiff than at her party because she didn't have to worry about keeping snacks and drinks fresh, and she was an even more energetic dancer than I remembered. After about 45 minutes of fast dancing in a row, when we were both sweating profusely, I said, "Let's take a break. What would you like to drink?" "Soda," was her reply. She stayed where she was until I brought her a glass, which made me smile broadly. "Does Tom ever bring you a drink?" I asked, sipping my beer. "I'm bringing drinks to Tom," she replied. After some more communication, during which she gave her typical brief answers to questions and, mostly, to body language in response to statements, I grinned, noting, "You're not very talkative, are you?" She smiled broadly. For some men, it's a dream not to be around a chatty woman. I believe in actions, not words. We danced a little more, and I took her with me to talk to different people at the party. She seemed pleased to be included in the conversation, although she still didn't say much. When the party started to end, she excused herself and went to look for Tom. I was about to leave when she came up to me and asked, "Can you help me with Tom?" He passed out. Of course, I smiled. I found Tom passed out on a glider on Jeremy's porch. Since it didn't matter before, I never mentioned my size. But I'm big enough and fit enough to throw about 80 kilograms over his shoulder in a firefighter style quite easily, walk to his car, and put him in the back seat. Being as verbose as I've ever heard her say, Susan asked, "Could you please follow me home and take him to our house?" "No problem," I smiled. Getting a dead-drunk Tom out of the back seat was harder than getting him out of a party at Jeremy's house, but still doable. "Where do you want to put it?" I asked Susan. "Please go to the master bedroom on the second floor," she said, opening the doors for me on the way. As soon as I put him on the bed, she and I left the bedroom and closed the door. At that moment, she attacked me like a fool in heat. After about 2 minutes of passionate kissing, she said, "In the shower." I really believe that the word shower was the only real word she uttered for the next 90 minutes, although she made a lot of noises, especially when I used her from behind in the shower. After we made love for the second time in what is sometimes called a face-to-face pose, I was sitting on the bed in her guest room, and she was looking at me. In the end, we stopped making love and lay side by side, lazily caressing. After a delightful period of joyful stupor, she said, "Tom sometimes wakes up after 2 hours of sleep. It's probably time for you to go." That was the most I've ever heard from her since I met her. After I got dressed and we kissed goodbye, she said, "If you want me to stay at your house on Wednesday evening, give me your address." Since the love this time was, "It's almost impossible to believe," even better than the first time, I replied, 902 Chardonnay Court. After another quick kiss, I walked out the door. I wasn't completely sure if Susan would show up at my house on Wednesday, but to make a good impression if she did, I professionally cleaned my house on Tuesday and put new sheets on the bed. When I pulled up to my house around 5:30 on Wednesday, Susan was standing on my porch with a big smile on her face. When I approached her, she gave me a short but passionate kiss. "I thought I'd order something Chinese with delivery after we had dessert," she chuckled. Dessert was her next attempt to tear it off when she rode me with the skill of an Olympic dressage champion. Susan insisted on paying the delivery boy for the food, and I delivered the refreshments. She confirmed my suspicions that she had not consumed alcohol. "I don't want to lose my head," was her excuse. I laughed to myself. What do you think, if not wildness, showing up in my hotel room to make love, and having sex in your house with your husband in the next room? After dinner, I invited her to watch a Netflix movie so that our food would have a chance to digest. Although, as usual, she didn't say much in response. It was obvious that she was pleased. She was very touching when we hugged while watching the movie. When the movie ended, she gave me another one of her patented passionate kisses and quickly undressed. After a shower, another moment even better than the previous ones, some conversations in bed. She again mostly answered questions briefly and used body language to answer statements. We fell asleep in each other's arms. I woke up sometime early in the morning. I think my alarm clock was showing something around 3:30 a.m. and turned her over to me. She woke up and the only words she uttered were, "It hurts," as she put her hands on her buttocks and separated them. I've only used it once in my life. It was a pleasant experience, but I wasn't going to repeat it. However, in the moonlight pouring through my skylight, her rosebud definitely looked tempting. I had a really nice moment, and apparently so did she, before we fell asleep in each other's arms again. When I woke up, Susan wasn't with me, but her clothes and small purse were still in my room, so I assumed she hadn't left. Besides, the smell of cooking bacon woke me up. When I entered the kitchen, the bacon was frying on the stove. Susan looked up from the notebook she was writing on and smiled. "I can make you an omelet," she said, straightening her naked body and kissing me again. "I'll help," I smiled, kissing her again. Naked, we cooked an omelet with cheese together. I asked her a few harmless questions with her typical short answers until I asked, "What did you write in your notebook?" "I was just doing some enthalpy calculations to modify the advanced BWXT nuclear reactor I'm working on," she replied, at the same time expertly flipping our omelet using only her wrist. "What did you say?" I laughed. She repeated what she had just said. After the second time, I was no less puzzled. "Why would you do that?" "No matter what you say, what are you doing?" I asked as she transferred the omelet from the pan to two different plates using a spatula. "It's part of my job. I'm a nuclear engineer," she replied matter-of-factly. At first I thought she was joking, but since I had no idea what enthalpy was, I studied economics in college and assumed it was a physical term that I might have heard in high school but couldn't remember exactly, or what the advanced nuclear reactor BWXT was. I didn't laugh. Instead, I asked, "Where did you study?" After eating a few slices of bacon and half an omelet, she began to really talk, not just answer questions or respond to statements. By the time we were both done, I realized she was a damn genius. Although she was only 27 years old, she received a doctorate in nuclear science and engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and worked in this field for 6 years. In fact, as soon as she started talking about her job, I don't think she stopped for 20 minutes while we finished breakfast, washed the bacon and omelet pans together, and put our plates and utensils in the dishwasher. In the end, she concluded, "Well, that's what I do in a nutshell." Of course, I understood about 1/10 of what she said, but it was clear that she was a fucking genius. Kissing her in the kitchen, I asked rhetorically, "So you're a genius?" "Actually, with your help, I'm becoming a genius in love," she grinned back, and then insisted on lying in bed one more time before we both left for work. For the next 4 months, I usually met with Susan twice a week for love. She was always mostly silent, unless we somehow touched on the topics of nuclear fission or thermonuclear fusion, which I read about just so I wouldn't be completely ignorant in her eyes when she turned into a chatterbox. The fact that Susan used me senseless twice a week made me a happy guy, so I didn't have many other dates. Then, during one of her sleepovers at my house, when Tom was out of town, I looked at her sleeping after another amazing contact. I noticed a few bruises on some parts of her body and wondered if Tom had hurt her. I got suspicious because when I asked her about Tom's physical treatment of her in the past, she never gave a real answer. I suddenly admitted to myself that I had feelings for her, and although I hated her husband more every time I saw him, because of the way he treated her and what an asshole he was in general, I also came to the conclusion that I was also an asshole because for using a married woman. I didn't sleep much that night from Monday to Tuesday morning. Mostly I stared at the ceiling, clutching Susan to me, although, of course, we were going to make love in the morning anyway, but I decided that I had to do something. Susan shocked the shit out of me at breakfast when she seemed to read my mind. "Don't you think you should invite me to stay with you, Connor?" "What is it?" she asked. It was the longest sentence she had ever uttered in front of me, not related to her work. "You're married," I said. "You have to get me out of this," was her quick reply, and then she kissed me and stormed out the door. I spent all my free time from work on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday thinking about Susan. I tried to call her on her cell phone, but the call went to voicemail and she didn't call back. On Thursday evening, 3 men and 1 woman in suits unexpectedly came to me. One guy, Arnold, introduced himself as Susan's boss. The other, Patrick, he was from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in Rockville, Maryland. The third guy, Agent Stoll, was an FBI agent, and the woman, Astrid, was a family law attorney. "We're here to talk about Susan Baring," Arnold said. "May we come in?" "Of course," I replied, leading them into my living room and offering them drinks, which they all declined. "Let me get right to the point," Arnold said. "As you may know, Susan is a genius and is very important for our nuclear reactor design project, which avoids most of the problems of existing BWR and PWR nuclear reactors. I was proud that from my conversations with Susan, I really knew what BWR and PWR were." "I really know that," I smiled. "Well, we need you to save Susan. She's in Mercy Hospital right now. Her husband beat her up," he continued. "What?" I exclaimed. "Obviously, that's the reason I couldn't get in touch with her. Since she is a Level 1 federal contractor, we have arrested him and he will not be released on bail," Agent Stoll added. "Susan hired me to file for divorce, which I intend to do tomorrow," Astrid interjected. "How can I help?" I asked. Susan would like to stay with you while she recovers. My company will pay for help during the day if you take responsibility at night. She's not helpless, she's just broken, Arnold continued. But she trusts almost no one except you. Then Arnold shocked the hell out of me. I'm afraid my company is largely responsible for Susan's predicament. Susan never had any contact before she came to work with us, as she was very quiet and shy, and was always the youngest student in her class throughout her studies. She began to show signs of depression, and she was so valuable to us that we arranged for Tom Baring to take care of her. Obviously, the people who vouched for Tom, I didn't know him very well myself either, didn't really know him or didn't take Susan's interest to heart. I actually saw a tear in Arnold's eyes, and Patrick patted him on the back before he continued. Obviously, Susan only agreed to marry Tom because he was the first guy who showed real interest in her, and she was single. As you can see, she didn't work out with Tom, but she shines like a Christmas tree every time she talks about you. She said that your approach to love is infinitely different from what it was with Tom, the only person she had love with, and if you have any feelings for her, we ask you to accept her to see if a long-term agreement with you will work. She says that in the less than a year that she has known you, she has had more love with you than in all 3+ years of marriage with Tom. I admit, I was shocked. The enthusiasm and joy with which Susan made love made me assume that she was experienced. Now I was told that she wasn't like that before we met, and that she had real feelings for me. While I was still trying to make sense of what Arnold had said, Patrick started telling me how valuable Susan was to the nuclear community when I politely interrupted him. I don't need an advertising campaign, Patrick. Before you arrived, I was trying to come to some kind of decision about Susan. Break up with her because she's married, or try to convince her to get rid of that asshole Tom. The current circumstances are very close to forcing me to commit myself to her. I'll tell you what, I'm going to visit her at the hospital right now, and after I talk to her, I'll call you, Arnold, to let you know my decision. Everyone was smiling. Do you mind if we look around your house to see where we could put a hospital bed for Susan, and what rooms need to be equipped for nursing care? Astrid asked. No, go right now, I smiled, taking my car keys off the rack in the kitchen where I keep them. Just make sure the front door is locked when you leave. I shook hands with all 4 of them, and then got into my car and drove to the hospital. Susan's private room was guarded by a policeman, but he quickly determined that I was allowed to see her, so I walked past him without any problems. I was stunned by her condition. She had 2 black eyes and other marks on her face and neck. One leg was twisted, and there was a cast on one arm. Although her eyes were closed, they immediately opened when I lightly stroked her cheek. Even though it seemed like it hurt her to do it, she smiled when she saw me. Do you only need me for love, Connor? What is it? She asked, and her smile turned to concern. No, although love with you is the best in my life. I like being around you, Susan. Maybe I'm even in love with you. I'm in love with you, Connor. You treat me much better than any man, including my male relatives. Besides, I had never been very sensual before I met you. Now I think about making love with you at least once an hour during the day. Will you let me live with you for a while? If in a couple of months you don't want me around anymore, I'll leave without any trouble. That would be great. I grinned and kissed her very gently on the lips. Her smile lit up the room. Then we continued the hour-long discussion about our life goals, our views on children, our origins, and much more. The almost silent Susan was no longer silent. In the end, the nurse kicked me out, saying that Susan needed to get some sleep. After my first visit to the hospital, everything quickly got off the ground. Susan was discharged 3 days later into my care. She signed a document prepared by Astrid that made me more or less her guardian. I don't remember the legal terminology until she got better, with access to her finances if I needed them, which I didn't. As a result, I enjoyed caring for Susan while she was recovering. In no small part, this was due to the fact that as soon as the day maid left, I massaged her breasts. After about a week, one of her legs no longer hurt, and the bruises had healed enough for us to make love provided we were careful, so that's what we did, as often as humanly possible. Susan was fully on outpatient treatment for 3 weeks after she came to my house. We got rid of the hospital bed, fired the day nurses, and she went back to work part-time. We enjoyed almost constant physical contact when we were together. One Saturday afternoon, 5 months after Susan had returned to normal, well, not to the old normal, when she hardly ever talked, but to normal after the hospital. When she liked to chat with me, she plopped down on my lap and said, "Connor, we need to talk, and not as well as I'd like. I want to tell you that I am a nymphomaniac." "Are you a nymphomaniac?" I pretended to gasp. "Is that why he's always in pain and spends so much time inside you?" "Bad Connor," she said, slapping me lightly on the shoulder. "Bad boy." "Okay, now listen to me. My divorce is next week, and I want your children. What are you going to do about it?" I said, stroking my chin. "Will I be able to use you with the same frequency if we get married?" "More often. Because I won't hold back anymore," she chuckled. "Damn it. Are you saying you were holding back?" I pretended to gasp again. "I'm not sure I can use it anymore." "You'll learn," she chuckled. "Good. Will I still be able to use you when you're pregnant?" "Maybe even more. I have a feeling that, unlike many pregnant women, my libido is likely to increase," she chuckled. "So, in other words, you plan to use me until I die early?" I chuckled. "Not to the grave, just to constant euphoria." "Okay," I said after a long pause. "Let's get married. So can I throw away my birth control pills?" "On our anniversary," I grinned. "That's what we did. We got married. On our 2-year anniversary, our first child was born. Our second one was born shortly before our 4-year anniversary. Our third and last one was born just before our 6th anniversary. After that, Susan's fallopian tubes were bandaged. I was not getting any younger, and her constant demands during pregnancy exhausted me, but in a completely joyful way. Somewhere along the way, 2 dogs appeared, and Susan received a $400,000 bonus when she completed the development of an improved nuclear reactor. The demonstration reactor was functioning even better than anyone else had predicted, although not Susan. With 3 children, 2 dogs, a husband who wants to use her at every opportunity, and a full-time part-time job as a nuclear engineer, Susan was no longer silent. She's a chatty cat. End.